The snow fell silently over the quiet neighborhood, covering everything in a cold, lifeless white. In a small corner of a backyard, a tiny dog shivered, his fur dusted with frost as the wind howled through the night. No one paid attention to him. Not the bigger dogs, not even his own owner. To them, he was just the smallest, weakest, most useless one. But that night, something felt different. A faint sound broke through the silence, a baby crying somewhere in the freezing dark. And while everyone else stayed warm inside, the smallest dog was the only one who listened. The Henderson family had lived on Elmwood Drive for nearly 7 years. It was one of those tidy suburban streets where the lawns were mowed on Saturdays, the mailboxes all matched, and life followed a comfortable, unbroken rhythm. Richard Henderson worked long hours as a regional sales manager, the kind of man who measured success in numbers and rarely sat still long enough to notice small things. His wife, Claire, was warm and efficient, a former schoolteacher who had traded her classroom for the beautiful chaos of raising their 2 children. Their older son, Daniel, was 8 years old, loud and full of energy, always chasing something, or breaking something, or demanding something. And then there was the baby, little Lily, 6 months old, with round cheeks, wide brown eyes, and the kind of smile that could pull a person out of any dark mood. She was the youngest, the newest, and in many ways, the heart of everything. The house itself was large and well kept, with a wraparound porch, 3 bedrooms, and a generous backyard that backed up against a line of old oak trees. In autumn, those trees blazed orange and amber. In winter, they became skeleton shapes against a gray sky. And in that backyard, through all 4 seasons, lived the dogs. There were 3 of them. Duke was the eldest, a massive, barrel-chested Labrador mix with a deep mahogany coat, and the quiet authority of a dog who had long ago decided he owned whatever room he walked into. At nearly 90 pounds, he moved slowly but deliberately, and Richard adored him. Duke had been Richard's dog before the marriage, before the children, before any of it. He was loyalty made flesh. Then there was Ranger, a 2-year-old Siberian husky with piercing blue eyes and a silver and white coat that made him look like something out of a wilderness painting. Claire had picked him out at a breeder, enchanted by his beauty, and Ranger had grown into exactly the kind of dog that drew gasps from strangers on the sidewalk. He was dramatic, energetic, and breathtaking to look at. And then there was Pip. Pip was, by any conventional measure, the odd one out. He was a miniature Alaskan Malamute mix, or at least, that was the shelter's best guess. With thick silver and white fur that should have made him look majestic, but instead made him look like a small, slightly disheveled cloud. He weighed just under 12 pounds. His ears were too big for his face, his legs were short, and his tail curled over his back in a way that seemed almost comic next to Duke's regal posture or Ranger's athletic grace. He had arrived in the Henderson household almost by accident. Daniel had spotted him at a shelter adoption event 2 years ago and begged with the particular ferocity that only an 8-year-old can sustain. Richard had agreed reluctantly. Claire had been neutral, and so Pip came home in a cardboard carrier with a thin fleece blanket and an uncertain future. From the very first week, the hierarchy had been clear. Duke ate first, Ranger ate second, Pip ate whatever was left. Whenever someone remembered to put his bowl down, Duke slept on the large orthopedic bed near the fireplace. Ranger had a padded crate in the corner of the living room. Pip slept in the laundry room, on a folded beach towel that had seen better days. The other 2 dogs did not bully him. They simply did not notice him. To them, he occupied a category somewhere between furniture and ghost. To Richard, Pip was a concession he had made years ago that he now mildly regretted. He was not cruel to the dog. He simply forgot about him. The way people forget about background noise. Claire tried, in her busy way, to give Pip some attention. She would scratch behind his oversized ears while waiting for the coffee to brew, or toss him a small treat when she remembered. But her days were relentless. Lily's feeding schedule, Daniel's school runs, the laundry, the groceries, the endless management of a full household. Pip was always last on the list, and on the list of everything that needed her attention. Last was often never. Daniel, for his part, had moved on to other obsessions. He had wanted a dog the way children want things, with burning urgency and zero follow-through. Within 3 months of Pip's arrival, Daniel had decided he was more interested in soccer and video games. He would sometimes pick Pip up and carry him around like a stuffed animal for 10 minutes, then set him down and walk away without another glance. Pip never complained. He simply watched. He was always watching. The gap between Pip and the other dogs was not just a matter of size or preference. It was structural. Duke received monthly grooming appointments and a premium grain-free diet that Richard ordered in bulk online. Ranger got twice daily walks, a specific joint supplement mixed into his food, and a professionally fitted harness for his runs with Claire on weekend mornings. Pip received store-brand kibble, occasional walks that were always shorter than the others, and a bathing routine that happened when someone finally noticed he smelled. He was, in every practical sense, the charity case of the household. Present but peripheral, acknowledged but not truly seen. What no one in the Henderson family understood, not yet, was that underneath that cloud of silver, white fur and behind those two big ears and small patient eyes, there was a mind that missed absolutely nothing. Pip had been watching them all for 2 years. He knew that Richard left for work at precisely 7:23 each morning, always checking his phone twice before getting into the car. He knew that Claire put Lily down for her afternoon nap at 1:30, always leaving the hallway nightlight on, and the door cracked exactly 3 inches. He knew that Daniel kept a secret stash of crackers in the bottom drawer of his dresser, and that Ranger howled at fire truck sirens, but not police sirens. He knew the difference between the sound of the refrigerator compressor cycling on and the sound of the back door opening. He knew, with an instinct sharpened by months of quiet observation, that the family he lived with was both deeply loving and profoundly inattentive to the things that happened just outside the edges of their attention. He was not bitter. He did not understand bitterness the way humans do, but he felt things. The cold of the laundry room floor, the warmth that drifted from the living room fireplace that he was never invited to sit near, the gentle weight of being invisible. He carried these things the way small creatures carry large burdens, quietly, and for a very long time. The trouble with Pip, according to Richard, began on a Tuesday in early November. It had been one of those mornings where everything went sideways at once. Lily had been up 3 times in the night with what seemed to be an ear infection. Daniel had missed the school bus because he could not find his left sneaker. Richard had spilled an entire travel mug of coffee on his work shirt and had to change in a furious rush. Claire was running on 4 hours of sleep and the particular exhaustion that accumulates not from one hard night, but from months of hard nights stacked on top of each other. In the middle of all this, Pip had been underfoot. He had not meant to cause trouble. He had simply been trying to follow Claire through the kitchen, the way he always did on chaotic mornings, staying close, watching, ready. But in the narrow corridor between the kitchen island and the counter, Claire had turned sharply, and her elbow had caught the edge of the baking sheet she was carrying. It clattered to the floor with a sound like a gunshot, sending a dozen of Lily's freshly pureed vegetable cubes skittering across the tiles. Claire had gasped. Lily had started crying upstairs. Richard, already furious and running late, had come around the corner and seen the mess and Pip standing in the middle of it, looking guilty simply by proximity. "That dog," Richard had said, in the flat tone that meant he was too angry to raise his voice, "is a liability." Pip had been locked in the laundry room for the rest of the morning. It was not the first time, but this time, when Richard came home that evening still irritable and tired, he made a decision. Pip would be moved outside. Not permanently, or so he told Claire when she raised an eyebrow, just during the days to keep him out of the way. There was a covered section of the back porch, he said, a proper outdoor dog run along the fence. He would get a good insulated kennel. It would be fine. Claire had hesitated. She had looked at Pip, sitting on the laundry room floor, with his tail curled tight and his ears flat, and she had felt something uncomfortable shift in her chest. But she was so tired, and Richard seemed so certain, and there were so many other things to manage, so she had said nothing, and by Thursday of that week, Pip was sleeping outside. The kennel Richard ordered was decent, a solid plastic structure with a thick foam pad inside, and a heavy fleece blanket Claire had tucked in herself. She had also added a second blanket when the temperature dropped in mid-November and a third in early December. But the kennel was still outside, and outside meant the full weight of a cold that had been building since October. A creeping, heavy cold that settled into the ground and turned the morning grass brittle with frost. Duke and Ranger remained inside. Of course they did. Pip watched the house through the wire of his run in the evenings, seeing the warm yellow light of the kitchen windows, hearing the muffled sounds of dinner and Daniel's cartoons and Lily's laughter. He could not articulate longing, but he felt it, in the particular way that dogs feel things, as a pressure behind the ribs, a weight that did not lift. There was one evening in late November when he had tried to communicate something important. He had heard a sound at the back fence, a low, cautious rustling in the oak leaves that he recognized immediately as something wrong. An animal, moving carefully, trying not to be heard. He had barked. Not the playful, attention-seeking bark he sometimes used near the kitchen window, but the sharp, urgent bark that meant danger. He had barked 3 times, then paused, then barked again. The kitchen light had gone on. Richard had come to the back door and peered out into the dark yard. He had stared in Pip's direction for a moment, then turned and gone back inside. He was just barking at a leaf, he told Claire. By morning, something had gotten into the compost bin by the fence. They never knew what it was. Pip knew, but no one had asked him. December arrived with the indifference of a season that has no interest in human schedules. The temperature dropped steadily. Some mornings, the water in Pip's outdoor bowl was frozen solid before Richard got around to replacing it. Claire had started checking it more frequently, feeling a guilt she could not entirely suppress. She had added a thermal bowl heater and a self-warming mat inside the kennel. She told Richard she thought Pip should come back inside during the coldest nights. Richard had said they would see. What made Pip extraordinary was not any single talent or trick. It was the accumulation of small intelligence. He had learned, over his 2 years in the Henderson household, how to nudge a door with precisely the right pressure to swing it open. He had learned that the latch on the outdoor dog run gate had a specific wobble when it was not fully secured. A 1/4 inch of play that could, with enough patience and the right angle of pressure, be coaxed into releasing. He had tested this knowledge in idle moments, never quite pushing it to completion, the way a student might rehearse an escape route without ever intending to use it. He had learned the sounds of the house at night. The particular creak of the 3rd stair from the bottom, the hum of the baby monitor sitting on the kitchen counter, a soft, constant static that changed quality when Lily stirred or cried. He had heard that monitor through the back door on countless evenings, and had cataloged the difference between Lily's regular fussing and the sounds she made when something was truly wrong. He was not mightier than Duke. He could not run faster than Ranger. He could not bark louder or jump higher or carry anything heavier than a chew toy. But he could observe, he could reason, in the patient, associative way that intelligent animals reason. He could hold a pattern in his mind and wait for the moment when that pattern mattered. That moment came on the 14th of December. The storm had been building for 2 days. The weather forecast had called for significant snowfall, 6 to 10 inches overnight, and by late afternoon, the sky had taken on that particular flat gray quality that people who have lived through real winters learn to recognize. Richard had come home early, which was unusual, and had spent an hour salting the front walkway and moving patio furniture into the garage. Claire had made a large pot of beef stew that filled the whole house with warmth and the smell of something good and slow cooked. Daniel had been put to bed at 8:30 after a prolonged negotiation. Lily had been fed, bathed, and settled into her crib in the nursery just before 9, the baby monitor blinking its small green light on the counter. The white noise machine in her room set to the ocean waves, setting she seemed to prefer. Richard and Claire had sat together on the couch for an hour after that. A rare moment of stillness in their relentless week. They had talked about Christmas plans, about whether Daniel's soccer league would restart in spring, about nothing in particular. By 10:30, they were both asleep, the television murmuring softly to no one. What no one had noticed, not Richard, who had been focused on the salt and the furniture, and not Claire, who had been managing the stew and the children, was that the nursery window had not latched properly that afternoon. It was the kind of small failure that happens in busy households 100 times a year with no consequence. A window latch that had been slightly bent since the summer, when Daniel had pressed a screen back into its frame with more force than necessary. It had seemed fine. It had always seemed fine, but when the storm arrived after midnight, not gently, but with the sudden violence of a true winter squall, driving wind and horizontal snow, and a temperature drop of 15 degrees in under an hour, The pressure of the wind had found that bent latch and slowly, inexorably, pushed the nursery window open. Just an inch, then two, then three. The cold came in like a presence. Lily, sleeping in her crib on the far side of the nursery, was well bundled in her sleep sack, but the room temperature, which had been a safe 70 degrees when her parents said goodnight, had begun to fall. She woke at 12:47, not screaming, but with the thin, confused cry of a baby who is cold and does not understand why. The white noise machine covered the first moments of her fussing. The baby monitor on the kitchen counter picked up the sound. The small green light shifted to amber. But no one was awake to see it. Outside, in his kennel at the far end of the back porch, Pip heard it. He had been awake already. The storm had kept him from sleeping deeply, the kennel shuddering in the wind, the fleece blankets doing their best, but not quite enough against the cold that had turned the night into something sharp and relentless. He had been curled tight in the corner of his kennel, nose tucked under his tail, monitoring the sounds of the storm with the alert passivity of an animal that cannot afford to miss anything. And then he heard it, faint, almost swallowed by the wind. The cry, not Daniel's voice. He knew Daniel's voice, not any sound the house usually made at this hour. It was Lily, and it was wrong. He uncurled. He stood up, pressing forward against the kennel opening, ears rotating forward in the way that meant he was concentrating. He listened for 3 seconds, 4, and the cry came again, higher this time, more distressed. He did not deliberate the way humans do, but something moved through him. A shift from passive to active, from waiting to moving. That was as close to a decision as a dog can make. He pressed forward out of the kennel onto the cold porch boards. The wind hit him immediately, driving snow against his face and chest. He shook his head once and moved toward the run gate, the latch. He knew the latch. He had tested it a dozen times without completing the motion. Now he pressed his muzzle to it with focused pressure, feeling for the quarter-inch of play he had memorized. The wind pushed against him. His paws slipped on the snow-dusted boards. He adjusted his stance and pressed again, harder, at a slight upward angle, and felt the resistance give. The gate swung open. For a moment he stood there, on the edge of the porch, looking out at the backyard. The snow was coming down hard, thick, fast, visibility almost zero. The oak trees at the back fence were invisible shapes in white darkness. The cold was a wall, pressing inward from every direction. He moved through it. He was small, and that smallness worked against him in the deep drifts that had already accumulated along the back fence. His legs punched through the snow crust with each step, sinking to his belly, requiring him to lunge forward in the exhausting high-step gait of a small animal crossing deep snow. He was 12 pounds. The world outside was immense and brutal and indifferent. But he knew the back door. He moved toward it with the directness of purpose, his head low against the wind, his small body burning through its reserves with every step. The porch light cast a weak yellow cone over the back steps, the only warm color in a world that had gone entirely white. He reached the back door and stood at the base of the steps, ears flat against his head in the wind, and barked. He barked the way he had barked at the fence in November. Not playfully, not anxiously, but with the specific, urgent cadence of alarm. 1 bark, 2, a pause, 3. It was not random noise. It was a pattern. He had learned that pattern from watching the family. The way they responded to rhythmic sound, differently than to continuous sound. 2 barks together read as background noise. 3 barks in pattern drew attention. He barked for 90 seconds. Nothing. The house was dark, the windows sealed against the storm. Richard and Claire asleep in the deep, complete way of people who are genuinely exhausted. He did not give up. He moved up the back steps, which was difficult, each step requiring him to gather himself and lunge, and threw himself at the base of the back door, scratching with both front paws in hard, rhythmic scrapes against the wood. He barked again. He threw himself at the door again. Inside, on the kitchen counter, the baby monitor's amber light had turned red. On the second floor, in the nursery, Lily's cries had grown stronger. She was fully awake now, frightened by the cold, her small fingers reaching up from the sleep sack as the temperature in the room continued to drop. At the back door, Pip scratched and barked and scratched until his paws ached and his voice was ragged. And then he heard it. The slow, groggy shuffle of someone waking up. The creak of the 3rd stair from the bottom. Claire came into the kitchen first, confused and half asleep, reaching for the light switch with the automatic motion of a parent responding to a sound she cannot yet fully identify. The monitor on the counter was red. That woke her up faster than any alarm. She reached it in 2 steps and heard Lily's crying, audible now even over the storm. And then, simultaneously, heard the frantic scratching at the back door. She opened it. Pip stood on the back step, covered in snow, his fur matted and wet, his small body shaking with cold and exertion. He looked up at her for exactly 1 second, and then turned and looked back at the yard, then up toward the house, then back at her. He barked once sharply, not at her, past her. Claire stared at him for a single, suspended moment, and then something in the way he was looking at her. Not with fear, not with the general agitation of a dog upset by a storm, but with the focused, deliberate attention of a creature trying to communicate something specific, made her brain snap fully awake. She ran up the stairs 2 at a time down the hall to the nursery. She pushed the door open and felt the cold immediately. The wall of frigid air that had been pouring through the open window for over an hour. Lily was in her crib, awake and crying, her face red, her small hands clenched into fists. The room was, by Claire's later estimate, somewhere around 55 degrees. She crossed the room in 3 steps, scooped Lily up against her chest, pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead. Cold. Not dangerously cold, not yet, but far too cold for a 6-month-old baby. She turned and saw the window open, the curtain billowing inward, snow dusting the sill. She crossed to it and shut it with one hand, pressing the latch down hard. With her other arm she held Lily tightly against her, rocking her, murmuring into her hair. Richard appeared in the doorway seconds later, woken by the sound of running feet. He took in the scene. Claire holding Lily, the wet snow on the windowsill, the cold that even now was only slowly beginning to dissipate. And his face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, then understanding, then something that looked very much like fear. "Is she okay?" he said. His voice came out rough. "I think so," Claire said. She was already moving toward the door, carrying Lily back toward the warmth of the master bedroom. "Get the thermometer." It took an hour to warm Lily properly, skin to skin contact, warm blankets, careful monitoring. Her temperature had dropped to 96.4 degrees, which is considered mild hypothermia in an infant. It was frightening. It was also, the pediatrician told them when Claire called at 2 in the morning, something that caught when they caught it would have no lasting consequences. Caught an hour later, the story might have been different. While Richard sat in the master bedroom with Lily sleeping on his chest, wrapped in 2 blankets, watching her breathe, Claire went back downstairs. Pip was still on the back step. She had not even thought to bring him in during the rush. He was sitting in the snow at the base of the door, shivering, patient, waiting. Claire stood in the doorway and looked at him, really looked at him. Perhaps for the first time since the night Daniel had carried him home from the shelter, in that cardboard box. She saw the wet, matted fur, the red paws from the cold and the scratching, the small ribs heaving with each shaking breath. She saw the way he looked up at her. Not with resentment, not with the wounded expectation of a creature who has been let down too many times to expect better, just with attention. Steady, patient, undemanding attention. She crouched down to his level in the doorway and held out both hands, palms up. He stepped forward and walked directly into them, pressing his face into her palms. "Oh, Pip," she said, and then she picked him up, both hands under his small, shaking body, and carried him inside. She set him on the kitchen floor and got a towel from the linen closet and dried his fur, gently and thoroughly, working through the matted snow until she could feel warmth returning to his skin beneath the fur. She turned the small space heater from the office on and set it on the kitchen floor near him. She put fresh water down, warm water, and a bowl of food, not the store brand kibble but the leftover stew from dinner, spooned out carefully and cooled to the right temperature. She sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor while he ate, one hand resting on his back, and she thought about things that were difficult to think about. She thought about the evening in November when he had barked at the back fence and Richard had said he was barking at a leaf. She thought about all the mornings she had scratched his ears absent-mindedly while waiting for coffee, never sitting down, never actually staying. She thought about the folded beach towel in the laundry room that she had called his bed for 2 years before the outdoor kennel replaced it. She thought about how she had said nothing when Richard made the decision to move him outside. Because she was too tired to argue, and because there were always other things that needed more of her. She thought about how he had heard Lily when no one else did. How he had gotten himself out of the kennel in a storm. How he had crossed a yard full of deep snow in the dark, in the cold, at 12 pounds, to scratch at a door that no one opened for 90 seconds. How he had kept trying. She stayed on the kitchen floor until he finished eating and settled against the space heater, his eyes half closed. His breathing evening out from the ragged panting of exhaustion to the slow, steady rhythm of warmth and rest. She kept one hand on his back the whole time. When Richard came downstairs at 3 in the morning, Lily finally asleep in the portable bassinet they had set up in their room, he found Claire still sitting on the kitchen floor, with Pip curled beside her. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the scene. At Pip, small and disheveled and asleep, paws still slightly red from the cold and the scratching. At his wife, sitting on the kitchen floor at 3 in the morning, leaning against the cabinet with her eyes open, and her face expressing something he recognized as the particular reckoning of a person confronting something they wish they had done differently. He sat down on the floor next to her. Neither of them spoke for a while. He got out of the run gate. Richard finally said, "Yes." And he came to the door. "Yes." Richard looked at Pip for a long moment. The dog's ear twitched in sleep. His small chest rose and fell. "I said he was barking at a leaf," Richard said. His voice was quiet and carried something heavy in it. "You didn't know." "No." He paused. "But I should have listened." It was, Claire thought, perhaps the most honest thing her husband had said in months. She did not say anything in response. She just leaned her shoulder against his, and they sat together on the kitchen floor, while the storm outside pressed against the windows, and the space heater hummed quietly and Pip slept between them. Warm. The pediatrician confirmed the next morning that Lily was perfectly fine. Good color, normal temperature, feeding well, no signs of distress. The word, lucky, was used several times in the conversation, and each time it was used, Claire and Richard exchanged a look that communicated something they were both still processing. They had been lucky. But luck was not the complete story. The complete story was that a 12-pound dog with 2 big ears and a cloud of silver, white fur, a dog who had spent 2 years being the last fed, the last noticed, the one who slept on a folded beach towel, and then in an outdoor kennel in December, had heard something that no one else heard, had gotten himself free through knowledge and patience, had crossed deep snow in a blizzard, and had spent 90 seconds scratching at a door that wasn't opening, and had not stopped. Daniel heard the story at breakfast. He sat very still while his mother explained what had happened. The window, the cold, Lily, the monitor turning red, Pip at the back door in the snow. He was 8 years old. And he was quiet in the way that children are quiet when something has landed in them fully, and they are still feeling the weight of it. Then he got up from his chair, walked to the living room where Pip was sleeping on the couch. The couch for the first time in his life. And sat down beside him. He put his hand on the small dog's back and sat there for a long time. He saved her, Daniel said, to no one in particular. "Yes," Claire said from the doorway. "I brought him home," Daniel said. There was something in his voice that was not quite pride. It was more tender than that. More careful, the voice of someone who has just understood something about responsibility that he hadn't understood before. The changes in the Henderson household after that were not dramatic or overnight. They did not arrive with ceremony or announcement. They arrived quietly, the way genuine changes usually do, in small adjustments that accumulated into something new. The outdoor kennel was taken apart and stored. Pip's folded beach towel was replaced with a proper orthopedic dog bed, the same model Duke slept on, placed near the living room fireplace, the warm side of the room that Pip had watched through windows for 2 years. Duke's nose wrinkled when he saw it there. Ranger sniffed it twice and walked away. Pip stepped onto it carefully, turned around once, and lay down. He looked at the fire. He did not look confused. He looked, if a dog can look such a thing, as though he recognized a thing that was owed. Richard started taking Pip on his Saturday morning walks. Not just the 5-minute circuit around the block that had been the dog's entire outdoor world for 2 years, but the full 40-minute route through the park that he had always taken with Duke. He did not make a speech about this. He just clipped Pip's leash to the new harness he had ordered. A proper one, fitted correctly, and said, "Come on, then," and walked out the door. Pip kept pace beside him without hesitation, as if he had been waiting for exactly this invitation for a very long time. The premium kibble that had been Duke's exclusive domain was now divided into 3 bowls. The vet appointment that had always been scheduled for Duke and Ranger now included Pip. A full checkup, the first thorough one he had received since his shelter intake exam. He was healthy, the vet said, slightly underweight but healthy. His teeth were good. His eyes were clear. His heart was strong. Of course it was, Claire thought. Lily, for her part, seemed to recognize Pip in the particular, wordless way that babies recognize important things when he was near her. Sitting at a careful distance, always watchful, never demanding, she would reach toward him with both arms and make the urgent, enthusiastic sounds that 6-month-olds make when they want something they cannot name. Claire would settle Pip beside her on the play mat, within reaching distance but with Claire's hand, ready to guide, and Lily would press her small palm into his fur with the uncomplicated joy of a person who has not yet learned to assess value by size. Pip was patient with her. He was always patient. He sat still when she grabbed his ear. He licked her hand gently when she offered her fingers to him. He watched her the way he watched everything, with the total attention of a creature for whom watching had always been the primary form of existing in the world. There was an evening in late December, just before Christmas, when the Henderson house was warm and decorated and full of the particular magic that the holiday brings to houses with young children. The tree was lit, Daniel was asleep, Lily was asleep, Richard and Claire were sitting together in the quiet of the living room, and Pip was on his orthopedic bed near the fire, stretched out fully on his side in the deep, unguarded sleep of an animal that finally feels safe. Claire looked at him and said, softly, so as not to wake him, "I keep thinking about what would have happened if he'd given up, if he'd just barked once and gone back to the kennel." Richard was quiet for a moment. "He didn't though," he said. "No," Claire said, "he didn't." She thought about what that meant. What it meant that he had kept going, kept trying, for an animal that had every reason in the world to stop, that had been overlooked and dismissed and moved outside and told, in every language that isn't words, but is nonetheless perfectly legible to a creature paying attention, that it did not quite belong, and had kept watching, and kept learning, and kept caring, and when the moment came, had not hesitated. She thought about the word that the pediatrician had used. Lucky. She did not think luck was the right word. She thought the right word was something closer to faithful. Not in the religious sense, in the older sense, in the sense of a creature that keeps faith with the people it loves even when those people have not yet earned it, even when those people have not yet seen it, even when the door does not open for 90 seconds in the middle of a blizzard and the cold is pressing in from every direction and the world is dark and indifferent and small. The fire crackled. The tree lights blinked in their quiet rhythm. Pip twitched once in his sleep, some dream running through him, some field or chase or unbounded movement, and then settled back into stillness, his small chest rising and falling, his nose buried in the warmth of his own folded paws. Outside, the snow was falling again, softer now, the kind of snow that falls after the storm has passed, gentle and slow, and covering everything in the same forgiving white. But inside, nothing was cold anymore, and the smallest dog, the one who had been ignored and forgotten and moved outside and told without words that he did not quite matter. He slept beside the fire in the place he had always deserved, dreaming in warmth, while the family he had saved slept safely around him. Some things cannot be measured in size. Some forms of intelligence cannot be seen until the moment they are needed most, and sometimes the one who watches quietly from the edges, the one who learns and waits and keeps faith even when no one is paying attention, is the only one who can save you when the window opens and the cold comes in and the night goes dark. And everything depends on whether someone was listening. Pip was always listening.